You know what keeps me up at night? It's not the stock market. It's not even inflation anymore. It's watching people who did everything right, saved for decades, maxed out their 401k contributions, built what they thought was a secure retirement, only to watch the purchasing power of those dollars evaporate like water on hot asphalt. And here's the thing nobody's talking about. Your IRA isn't just sitting there waiting for you to retire. It's actively losing value every single day the dollar weakens. Not in nominal terms. Your statement still shows the same number. But in real terms, in what that money can actually buy, that's a completely different story. Let me show you what's happening right now, because the data is absolutely staggering. The dollar's share of global reserves has collapsed from 72% back in 2001 to just 58% today. Think about that. In less than a quarter century, the world's central banks have systematically reduced their dollar holdings by nearly 20%. These aren't retail investors making emotional decisions. These are the most sophisticated financial institutions on the planet managing trillions in assets, and they're quietly backing away from the dollar. But here's where it gets really interesting. What are they buying instead? Gold. Massive amounts of gold. Central banks purchased over 1,000 tons of gold last year alone. That's the second highest annual total on record. And they're not slowing down. If anything, they're accelerating. Now, why would central banks, institutions that literally print money, be dumping dollars and buying gold at a pace we haven't seen since the 1970s? Because they know something. They understand the mathematics of what's coming. And those mathematics are brutal. The U.S. national debt just crossed $36 trillion. Let that sink in for a moment. 36 trillion. That's not just a big number. It's an impossible number. The interest payments alone are now exceeding $1 trillion per year. We're paying more in interest than we spend on defense, more than we spend on Medicare. We're borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. This is the debt spiral economists have warned about for decades. And once you're in it, there are only two ways out: default or inflate. And guess which one governments always choose? They inflate. They print more money, they devalue the currency, because defaulting means admitting failure. Inflation means you can pretend everything's fine while secretly eroding the value of every dollar in existence. And your IRA? It's sitting right in the crosshairs. Think about what inflation really means for retirement accounts. Let's say you've got $500,000 saved up. Sounds like a decent nest egg, right? But if inflation runs at just 6% annually, which is actually lower than what we saw recently, that $500,000 loses $30,000 of purchasing power in the first year alone. By year 5, you've lost over $150,000 in real value, even if your account balance stays the same. Now imagine inflation runs higher. Imagine it hits 8%, 10%, or even the double-digit rates we saw in the late 70s and early 80s. Your retirement savings get absolutely decimated. Not because the number changed, but because what that number can buy has fundamentally shifted. And here's the cruel irony. The people who saved the most, who did everything right, who sacrificed and invested for decades, they're the ones who get hurt the worst, because they have the most to lose. I was talking to a financial advisor recently who told me about a client of his. Retired engineer, 72 years old, had been saving since his 20s, built up a retirement account worth about $800,000. Thought he was set for life. Then inflation hit. His fixed income couldn't keep up. His savings started evaporating. Within 2 years, his lifestyle had changed dramatically. Not because he spent recklessly, he was actually quite frugal, but because everything cost more and his dollars bought less. He came back to the advisor in a panic, asking what he could do. And the advisor had to tell him the hard truth. You can't go back in time. You can't undo the damage inflation already caused. All you can do is protect what's left. That's the position millions of retirees and near retirees are in right now. Watching their purchasing power melt away, wondering why nobody warned them this could happen. But some people did see it coming, and they took action. There's a reason gold has been used as money for 5,000 years. It's not because of tradition or superstition. It's because gold has properties that make it uniquely suited to preserve wealth across time. It's scarce. You can't print more of it. It's durable. It doesn't corrode or decay. It's divisible. You can break it into smaller units. And most importantly, it's recognized globally as valuable. When currencies collapse, gold survives. When governments fall, gold survives. When empires crumble, gold survives. Look at what happened in Weimar Germany in the 1920s. Hyperinflation destroyed the German mark. People needed wheelbarrows full of cash to buy bread. Life savings became worthless overnight. But the people who held gold, they preserved their wealth. They could still buy food, still pay rent, still maintain their standard of living while everyone around them suffered. Or look at Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Inflation got so bad they printed $100 trillion notes. 100 trillion. And those notes couldn't buy a loaf of bread. But gold maintained its value. People who had even small amounts of gold could trade it for goods and services while the currency became toilet paper. You might think, that can't happen here. We're America. We're different. And you're right. We are different. We're the world's reserve currency. Which means when we inflate, we export that inflation globally. We make the whole world pay for our debt. But that privilege doesn't last forever, and the signs that it's ending are everywhere. China and Russia are settling trade in their own currencies now, bypassing the dollar entirely. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil sales. The BRICS nations are actively working on an alternative payment system. Even our allies in Europe are quietly diversifying away from dollar reserves. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented policy from foreign governments. They're preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer dominant. And when that shift happens, not if, but when, the value of dollar-denominated assets is going to take a massive hit. Your IRA, your 401k, your savings account, they're all denominated in dollars, which means they're all exposed to this risk. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but my IRA is invested in stocks, not cash. Stocks should keep up with inflation, right? And in theory, yes. Over very long time periods, stocks have historically outpaced inflation. But there are two problems with that logic. First, we're not talking about normal inflation. We're talking about potential currency crisis, debt spiral, loss of reserve status inflation. In those scenarios, stock markets can get absolutely crushed. Look at what happened to the Nikkei in Japan after their bubble burst. Took decades to recover. Or look at emerging market stocks during currency crises. They don't just fall, they collapse. Second, even if stocks do eventually recover, you might not have time to wait. If you're retired or near retirement, you can't afford to watch your portfolio drop 40 or 50% and then wait 10 years for it to come back. You need that money now. You need it to maintain your lifestyle, pay your bills, cover healthcare costs. This is why diversification matters. Not just diversification across different stocks or sectors, but diversification across different asset classes, different types of value storage. And historically, nothing has preserved wealth through currency crises better than precious metals. Gold hit over $4,000 per ounce recently. That's not a bubble. That's a warning signal. The market is telling us something. Institutional investors, central banks, sovereign wealth funds, they're all moving into gold because they see what's coming. And it's not just gold. Silver is showing similar patterns. Silver has industrial uses that gold doesn't. It's essential for solar panels, electronics, electric vehicles. As the green energy transition accelerates, industrial demand for silver is skyrocketing. But above-ground silver supplies are actually declining. We're using more than we're mining. That's a recipe for a massive supply squeeze. Some analysts are predicting silver could hit $100 per ounce or higher in the coming years. That would be a more than threefold increase from current levels. And unlike stocks, which can be diluted through share issuance, or currencies which can be printed at will, you can't create more silver out of thin air. The supply is what it is. Now here's where this gets really practical for retirement planning. A lot of people don't realize you can actually hold physical precious metals inside an IRA. It's called a gold IRA, or precious metals IRA. The IRS allows it. You get the same tax advantages as a traditional IRA, but instead of holding paper assets that are vulnerable to currency devaluation, you're holding physical gold and silver. If you've got $100,000 or more in retirement accounts, this is something worth looking into. I actually put together a free guide that explains exactly how gold IRAs work, how to set one up, how to transfer funds from existing retirement accounts without triggering taxes or penalties, what types of metals qualify, how storage works, all of that. It's in the description below. No obligation, just information. Because I think everyone should at least understand their options when it comes to protecting retirement savings. Anyway, the point is this. You have choices. You're not locked into watching your purchasing power erode. There are strategies available that can help preserve wealth even in inflationary environments. But let's get back to the bigger picture. because there's more happening here than just inflation. The entire global financial system is going through a transformation right now. We're watching the end of the post-World War II monetary order play out in real time. The Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. Since then, we've been in a pure fiat currency system, money backed by nothing but government promises. And for 50 years, that system worked reasonably well. The dollar remained dominant. Global trade flowed smoothly. Central banks could manage their economies through monetary policy. But the cracks are showing now. The debt levels are unsustainable. The inflation is persistent. The geopolitical tensions are rising. Countries are choosing sides. Alliances are shifting. And the dollar's role as the global reserve currency, the foundation of American economic power, is being actively challenged. When the British pound lost its reserve status after World War II, Britain went through decades of economic decline. Their standard of living fell. Their global influence diminished. Their currency devalued repeatedly. It was a long, painful adjustment. Now imagine that happening to the dollar. Imagine the U.S. losing reserve currency status. What happens to all those dollars held overseas? They come flooding back home. That's trillions of dollars of additional money supply hitting the domestic economy. The inflationary impact would be catastrophic. Your groceries would cost more. Your gas would cost more. Your health care would cost more. Everything would cost more. And your fixed income retirement savings would buy less and less with each passing month. This is the scenario that keeps economists up at night. And it's not some distant theoretical possibility anymore. It's a real risk that's growing more likely with each passing year. The federal government is running trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. There's no political will to cut spending. There's no appetite for raising taxes enough to close the gap. So they'll keep borrowing and keep printing. And eventually the rest of the world will say, enough, and start demanding something more stable than dollars. What will they demand? Probably a basket of currencies. Probably some kind of commodity backing. And almost certainly, gold will play a major role. The Chinese have been accumulating gold for years. They don't report their full holdings, but estimates suggest they have well over 3,000 tons, possibly much more. Russia has been buying aggressively too. Even countries like Poland, Hungary, and India are adding to their gold reserves at rates we haven't seen in decades. They're preparing for a new monetary system, one where gold matters again, one where currency values are tied to something real rather than just government promises. And when that transition happens, the people who positioned themselves ahead of time, who diversified into hard assets, who protected their wealth with precious metals, they're going to be in a much better position than those who stayed fully exposed to dollar-denominated paper assets. I'm not saying sell everything and buy gold. That would be foolish. Diversification means holding multiple types of assets. But I am saying that having zero exposure to precious metals in this environment is a massive risk that most people don't fully appreciate. Think about it from a risk-reward perspective. If I'm wrong and the dollar remains strong, inflation stays low, and everything continues smoothly, what's the downside of holding some gold? Maybe you underperform the stock market by a few percentage points. That's it. You still have your wealth. You still have your purchasing power. But if I'm right, and we see currency devaluation, persistent inflation, or even a currency crisis, what's the downside of not holding gold? You could lose 30, 40, 50% of your purchasing power. Your retirement plans could be completely derailed. Your standard of living could decline dramatically. That's an asymmetric risk. The potential downside of not protecting yourself is far greater than the potential downside of taking protective action. And here's something else to consider. Gold isn't just about protection anymore. It's also about opportunity. When gold was at $1,800 per ounce a few years ago, a lot of analysts said it was overvalued. Now it's over $4,000. Those who bought then have more than doubled their money. Could it go higher? Absolutely. If we see the kind of monetary instability I'm describing, gold could easily hit $5,000, $6,000, even higher. Some long-term forecasts suggest $10,000 per ounce isn't out of the question if we get a real currency crisis. Silver has even more upside potential because of the supply-demand dynamics I mentioned earlier. The gold-to-silver ratio, how many ounces of silver it takes to buy 1 ounce of gold, is historically around 60 to 1. Right now, it's closer to 90 to 1. That suggests silver is significantly undervalued relative to gold. When that ratio normalizes, silver prices could explode higher. But even if you're not trying to make money, even if you're just trying to preserve what you have, precious metals serve a crucial role in a diversified portfolio. They're insurance. They're a hedge against the exact risks that are most likely to derail retirement plans. And the beautiful thing about holding physical metals in an IRA is that you get tax-advantaged growth. If gold does go to $6,000 or $8,000 per ounce, and you're holding it in a traditional IRA, you don't pay taxes on those gains until you take distributions. If you're holding it in a Roth IRA, you never pay taxes on the gains at all. Compare that to holding gold outside of a retirement account, where you'd pay capital gains taxes on any appreciation. The IRA structure gives you a significant advantage. Now, I want to address something I hear a lot. But gold doesn't pay dividends or interest. It just sits there. And that's true. Gold doesn't generate cash flow, but neither does the cash sitting in your savings account, at least not meaningful amounts given current interest rates. And unlike cash, gold can't be printed into oblivion by central banks. The purpose of gold isn't to generate income. It's to preserve purchasing power. It's to maintain wealth across time and through currency fluctuations. And at that job, it's been remarkably effective for thousands of years. Think about it this way. If your grandfather had bought gold in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window, he would have paid $35 per ounce. Today, that same ounce is worth over $4,000. That's more than a 100-fold increase. Meanwhile, the dollar has lost over 95% of its purchasing power during that same period. Which would you rather have inherited, the dollars or the gold? The answer is obvious. And yet millions of Americans have their entire retirement savings in dollar-denominated assets with zero precious metals exposure. They're taking on enormous currency risk without even realizing it. Part of the problem is that financial advisors often don't recommend gold. Why? Because they can't charge ongoing management fees on physical metals. They make money by keeping you invested in stocks and bonds where they can collect their annual percentage. There's no incentive for them to recommend an asset that doesn't generate fees. I'm not saying all financial advisors are bad or self-interested. Many are genuinely trying to help their clients. But the industry structure creates conflicts of interest that can work against your best interests. This is why you need to educate yourself. You need to understand the risks you're facing and the options available to protect against those risks. You can't just blindly trust that someone else is looking out for you. Your retirement security is too important. And the clock is ticking. Every day that passes with high inflation is another day of purchasing power lost. Every month the government runs massive deficits is another month closer to a potential currency crisis. Every year foreign central banks reduce their dollar holdings is another year the reserve currency status erodes. The time to act is before the crisis hits, not after. Once everyone realizes the dollar is in trouble, once the panic starts, it'll be too late. Gold prices will skyrocket. Premiums on physical metals will explode. Dealers will run out of inventory. You won't be able to get protection at reasonable prices anymore. We saw this happen in 2008 during the financial crisis. Gold dealers were completely sold out. Premiums on silver coins went through the roof. People who waited until the crisis was obvious paid far more than those who positioned themselves ahead of time. The same thing will happen again, except probably worse because the underlying problems are bigger now. The debt is higher, the deficits are larger, the geopolitical tensions are more severe. When the next crisis hits, it's going to make 2008 look like a minor correction. And your IRA? If it's sitting in traditional stocks and bonds, fully exposed to dollar risk, it's going to take a beating. Not because stocks are bad investments, they're not, but because in a currency crisis, everything denominated in that currency loses value. This is why diversification into hard assets matters so much. It's not about getting rich. It's about not getting poor. It's about maintaining your standard of living when the monetary system goes through upheaval. Look, I get it. This is uncomfortable stuff to think about. Nobody wants to believe their retirement savings are at risk. Nobody wants to imagine a scenario where the dollar loses significant value. It's easier to just assume everything will work out fine. But hope is not a strategy. Wishful thinking doesn't protect wealth. Action does. And the good news is that taking action isn't complicated. You don't need to become a precious metals expert. You don't need to time the market perfectly. You just need to allocate a reasonable portion of your retirement savings into physical metals as a hedge against currency risk. Most experts suggest somewhere between 10 and 20% of your portfolio in precious metals. That's enough to provide meaningful protection without being overly concentrated in any single asset class. If you're more concerned about inflation and currency risk, you might go higher. If you're less concerned, you might go lower. But having zero exposure in this environment seems reckless to me. And again, if you want to learn more about how to actually implement this, how to set up a gold IRA, how to transfer funds, what the process looks like, check out that free guide I mentioned. It walks through everything step by step. No pressure, no sales pitch, just information so you can make an informed decision. Because ultimately, this is your retirement we're talking about. Your financial security. Your ability to maintain your lifestyle in your later years. That's too important to leave to chance or to trust that the government will somehow fix the debt problem before it becomes a crisis. They won't fix it. They can't fix it. The political incentives are all wrong. The math doesn't work. The only question is how bad it gets and how quickly it happens. Your job is to protect yourself and your family, to position your assets in a way that preserves wealth regardless of what happens to the dollar, to make sure that decades of hard work and saving don't evaporate because of monetary policy decisions made by politicians and central bankers. The people who understand this and take action now will look back in 5 or 10 years and be grateful they did. The people who ignore the warning signs and hope for the best will look back with regret, wishing they had protected themselves when they had the chance. Which group do you want to be in? The choice is yours. But the window for taking action at reasonable prices is closing. Every day, more people wake up to these risks. Every day, more money flows into precious metals. Every day, the supply gets tighter and the premiums get higher. Don't let your IRA melt with the dollar. Don't watch decades of savings lose purchasing power because you didn't take basic protective measures. The tools are available. The information is available. All that's missing is the decision to act. Your future self will thank you.